I've been working on the horror bingo board by Wicked Reading since it dropped at the beginning of October. Since at my current pace, I definitely don't see myself finishing this board or even necessarily getting a row or line by the time the next board comes around at the start of this October. What I'm going to do is pick a line and work my way through the prompts. I've decided to go with this column, the fourth along, because I currently don't have anything in it, and I think that I can find a good book that I already own or can get access to easily for each of the prompts. So the prompts I'll be reading for are paranormal, spell ghost or scare in the title, LGBT plus rep, the title includes a verb, and a book that works with another goal. I'm going to start with paranormal and pick up Strange Beasts by Susan J. Morris. So the book I ended up picking for this square was Wayward Souls by Susan J. Morris. This is the second book in her Harker and Moriarty series, which started with Strange Beasts. I read that one last year and I really enjoyed it, but it didn't quite give me what I had been looking for from the blurb and my own expectations. The series as a whole is following, I think it's Hel Moriarty, who is the daughter of Dr. Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes books, and Sam Harker, who is the daughter of Mina and Jonathan Harker from... The two of them have been teamed up to work together for the Society for the Study of Supernatural Events, creatures, something along those lines. So it's a paranormal investigation with these literary characters pulled in for cameos. This first one sent them off to Paris. They were looking for a monster. Lots of that was set in the catacombs, early 1900s Parisian streets. There was a big thing with the opera house. The vibes were immaculate and I loved the setting. Morris really nailed that. What it lacked was the romance, which is unusual for me, but I didn't feel the romance was strong enough, was an obvious enough element for the way the book had been marketed. In this sequel, Hel and Sam are off again. This time they are being sent over to Ireland with the unwanted extra shadow Jacob Van Helsing, who again, he's Van Helsing's son or grandson, and he knows Sam from their childhoods. We are starting out with Sam and Hel in a bit of bother. They're being investigated by higher ups in the organisation. There's always, I think, been a lot of distrust around them. More so Hel, who everyone kind of thinks is maybe actually running her father's criminal organisation and that he's already dead, she's taken it over. There's a lot of distrust there. But they also don't really trust Sam because I think we're pulling in the idea from Dracula that Lucy, who obviously the Van Helsings ended up killing, had visions, she had some kind of paranormal connection, and if Sam has the same thing, that makes her very dangerous, you know, in a it would be kinder to kill her now type of way, and Sam does, but they're keeping that as quiet as possible. So there are some old doddery men who would quite like to sideline them from the investigation, but because it's in Ireland where Hel is from, because there have been rumours of ties to the Moriarty, I guess, crime family, she's the natural person to send in as Englishmen in Ireland start to go missing. So far I'm sitting around 30-ish%. And again with this one, the setting is just as impeccable. Morris has really, between the two, been able to give you quintessentially gothic vibes in completely different settings. Paris, the catacombs, all of that fit the gothic vibe of that book. And now we're in Ireland, it's very different, and yet it still does have that gothic Victorian sensibility to it, even though the setting is so different. The pubs we're seeing, the hotels, the docks, the way the mist rolls across the landscape, the talk of fair folk and the wild hunt, and all the kind of Irish inspired supernatural mythology that's coming into play as they investigate. It all feels really just, you can touch the atmosphere and the vibes. There is a little bit more movement on the romance. Our two women are, I think they're very aware of the attraction between themselves. They want to spend more time together, but they're also very aware that because of the way they're being observed. They really can't be seen to be overly friendly, let alone anything more than that, which gives you that nice slow burn, but it doesn't feel like the characters are dragging things out. It's a nice kind of plot construct that we have. They can't actually move forward in their relationship, but there's a viable reason for that. It's coherent and like thought through with the plot. I'm having a good time with it. It does feel very, very fast paced. We are thrown in right at the start with that, them being under suspicion, and from there they are immediately told you're off to Ireland for this. And there's really not been a slow moment since. It's definitely had a real upkick in the pacing, which is working really well for me. Thinking back, I had a couple of, not issues, but I did think that the pacing on Strange Beasts was a little bit slow in places, and this one has definitely turned that round and fixed it. It has a really nice speed, and it feels like it makes sense because we already know the characters. We're not spending a lot of time establishing that, which I do think that means that you probably would want to read the first book before you read this one. I don't think you could come into the series here. This is a completely new case, but in terms of the characters, we really aren't holding your hand. You just have to remember the characters' relationships with each other from that first book and proceed from there. It is really good though. I'm having a good time with it, and I think this is going to be quite a highly rated one. Wayward Souls really worked for me. It felt like a big improvement on Strange Beasts, which I already really enjoyed, but this one just took everything up a notch and kind of smoothed out the couple of problems that I had with the first book. The atmosphere is still entirely there. You still have the really gothic, luscious, descriptive writing that I loved in the first book, but gothic in a slightly different way that totally fits this new setting. The first book felt very Parisian Gothic, whereas this feels very old school Irish Gothic, and it really worked. The setting just fit perfectly. The tone of the book, that kind of atmosphere that I think is probably going to permeate the series, but also it felt like it was appropriate for the place that both Hel and Sam are in mentally, emotionally, in this particular book. They're both struggling in how they're seen as professionals and how they're trying to relate to each other, how they're trying to build something between themselves, and then their own personal problems. Hel with whether she is worthy after all the terrible things she's done in service to her father, and Sam as to whether this power that she has is ultimately inevitably going to damn her in some way. It was a perfect setting and atmosphere for those internal conflicts. It really worked well. Where I thought it outshone Strange Beasts was in its pacing. This one, it started out much faster, and I think it kept that momentum going far better. In Strange Beasts, I do remember there being parts that I felt the momentum kind of stuttered to a halt and we had to build it up again. I think that in this one, Morris has a much smoother journey. She does obviously have moments of high intensity, slightly lower, quieter moments, the way you need in any book, but it felt more uniform. It definitely felt like a book that has really upped the game of the series, and even more firmly than the first book, makes me want to continue with it. So that's a great start to the bingo line. And the next square that I'm going to be looking for something to fill is to spell the word scare or the word ghost with the letters that are on the cover. I had a book in mind for this prompt that I've had in mind since the prompt's released, and I don't know. I picked The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, and I've heard nothing but good things about this book, and I do think I'm gonna really like it. It's historical, kind of academic in the modern day, but historical, Native American bred vampire hunters. I mean, what's not to love? I tried it on audiobook though, and I don't know if I'm just not in the mood for the book right now, or if the audiobook just isn't working for me. I have no problem with the narrator. It's not one of these cases where the narrator's voice is annoying, or they talk too slowly or too fast, or they're doing strange accents. The narrator themselves is fine. I think there's maybe 2 narrators and both of them are fine. Three narrators, and they're all fine. I'm just failing to take in the information. It's just not working for me as an audiobook. I do though have, I don't know if you can see somewhere in the background there, I do have Buffalo Hunter as a hardback, so I do plan on going back to it. I definitely still want to give it at least another shot. I still think I'm gonna enjoy it, but for now I really wanted an audiobook to continue reading. I went through quite a few books on the TBR. I don't have a lot on my horror shelves, so I was counting letters, ticking them off, trying to get something that fit. And then the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre by Philip Fracassi jumped out. The letters for the word scare all grouped right there together at the end of Massacre fits perfectly. So that's the one I then picked up on audiobook to continue with. I will get back to Buffalo Hunter, but this is what I'm reading for the square now so that I can use an audio. I'm actually really close to finished. I think I'm sitting around 80%, so it would need to do something very unexpected and very disappointing for me to not come out of this having had a good time. I wasn't really sure what to expect, if I'm honest, because it's got a massacre right in the title and it's classified as horror, so I was aware that we could be doing something quite violent, quite gory, quite horror-y. But I don't know, and this is me, but the fact it's the retirement home made me think of like Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club, or maybe something like Only Murders in the Building. Having those older characters, those retirees, those octogenarian characters, just made me think of something cozier, which is entirely my biases. People in their 70s can be final girls if they want, and that is very much what this book is saying. I was a little bit unsure what we were going to do tone-wise, and I wasn't entirely convinced that it was going to fit for horror bingo, which is why I've held off on actually filming an update. But it does manage, it kind of manages to do both. The retirement home is very nice, but it's definitely hitting those isolated setting, trapped together horror tropes really well. You have the retirement home itself, which, as I said, is a nice setting. But I think it's really smart that Fracassi is very much using it to serve those purposes of trapping people in with a killer. And not just because, oh, you can lock the doors, but because he makes some great points about being older, being elderly, being in a home that's not your own, and the way that a lot of people are forgotten about by their families. At one point we have had a killing spree going on, and the detectives say if you can maybe go and stay with some family or friends, you might just be safer all around. And we're left with a certain amount of people in the retirement home who say either they don't have anyone to go with, fair enough, but there's a definite few who'll say my son and his wife are going fishing this weekend, or they've said that there's no space for me because, and there are reasons that feel really shallow. It's really sad, that idea. There's quite a few of the characters, and our protagonist Rose makes a point that she's not one of them. She too is feeling sorry for these other characters who have family, that have children that they've raised, and then when they need them most, when they're in this horrific situation, they get fobbed off with these flimsy excuses because they would be a nuisance. They would maybe make their children's lives just a tiny bit less convenient. And it's really sad to see the way they've kind of been shelved and forgotten about, and the way they're not being visited, they're not being cared for by the people that they want to care for them. And so the trapped setting comes not just from the idea of it being physically isolated, but these people, a lot of them don't have anywhere else to go, and so their only choice is to stay and risk being taken out like fish in a barrel. And that obviously then amps up all the tension as well. There's a lot of recriminations, a lot of blame being shot about, and it actually has been a really good tense environment. I've also really enjoyed the way Fracassi has been able to humanize these people as our slasher is moving through the retirement home. We are very much doing one of those summer camp slasher movies, and I think the moments where you are with each victim as the killer strikes, the moment the killer is there, they have their realizations, what's happening, they have their final moments, are really heartbreaking and really touching. And I think that's been really well done because it is quite a big cast of secondary characters. We have all of the residents, all of the staff, there are some police detectives. It's a big cast, and though we obviously get a little more time with the victims, We don't necessarily, for all of them, get a huge amount. We spend most of our time with Rose, our final girl protagonist, and I'm impressed with how those characters that we maybe had never had a POV from, we'd maybe only seen in a couple of scenes, were really able to feel heartbreaking in their last scene. I don't think it's going to be a 5-star read, but I am having a good time and I can comfortably say it's going to be at least a high 3 or a 4. I still do have to finish that last 20%, and maybe I'll have some slightly more coherent thoughts for you then. As I thought, the Autumn Springs Retirement Centre Massacre was a lot of fun. I didn't have any problems with it. I thought the ending was in keeping with what we'd set up. The killer was suitably unhinged. I really liked that we didn't try to build in too complex a motive for our killer or give them too many redemptive qualities in the end. I liked that this was a proper slasher horror movie type of book rather than something that encourages us to feel sympathy for the villain. I liked it in its simplicity and I had a good time with that. I liked that it really did hit those same tropes, just with an older cast and in an unusual cast relevant setting. I still don't think it's a 5-star read for me, but it definitely hits a 4, and I do think it's been a really good installment to really get me into more of the horror side of this vlog. I am picking a book with LGBTQIA+ representation. The book I chose is The Honeys by Ryan Sala. This is about a gender fluid protagonist whose twin sister went off to a summer camp kind of religiously, and when she comes back one year she has changed. She dies in the first chapter and Mars decides to take up her spot at the summer camp and see what he can find out. The Honeys are a Heathers-like group at the camp that his sister was a part of. There's something slightly strange about them, so be interested to see how that goes. I'm currently about halfway. The book is split into parts and I am just at the beginning of part 4. Max is very well established at the camp. He has met the Honeys. They seem more welcoming than anyone else. They seem very accepting of him and his gender fluidity. They help him put on, nail varnish. They give him some clothes to wear. The camp is very, very gender binary. Honeys do seem the most accepting, but there's also something vaguely just off about them that I don't know that Mars has noticed, but as a reader you definitely notice there's something. Other characters say kind of contradictory things about them. So the Honeys themselves aren't featuring massively, but I do think they're gonna be the real kind of inciting force of the finale of the story. What we have it a lot of is Mars fitting into the boys' camp, the boys' cabin, having to take part in activities that are very gendered. The boys are very resentful of the fact that some of the things in the camp had to change when Mars originally left. They originally had a battle of the sexes due to the incidents that happened. It's now been rebranded as like I can't remember, is it Victory Village or something along those lines, but it is still Battle of the Sexes because they still split it right down the middle. It's just been renamed, but they resent having had to make these tiny inconsequential changes to what they see as their place. There's the usual kind of homophobia and just don't like him, they resent him, and he's having to prove himself kind of constantly and decide, I guess, between the easy route sometimes of conforming, which because he's trying to investigate his sister's death, he does have to do that in some ways, but he's also wanting to stay true to who he is, even if that means he gets into more fights and more conflicts. I'm enjoying Mars as a character. He is really brave and really true to himself. He's not really been looking into what happened to his sister that much, if I'm honest, but we are getting a really good sense of the camp, and I feel like maybe that's what he's doing at the moment. The opening chapter was a banger. The opening chapter, I don't feel like it's a spoiler to tell you the opening chapter, so we start with Mars waking up, his sister over him, ready to absolutely brain him with a paperweight. There's a massive chase down the hall and it ends up with his sister going over a railing. The whole thing is just so action-packed, it's so violent and so dramatic. It's a real shock. It was really hard to read actually, even we've not really met Mars or his sister at that point. We really don't know them, but somehow La Sala really does make you care. Even in those short paragraphs, you really care that the betrayal and the hurt and that kind of what do I do sensation, all of it comes through really well. He really builds that character in the moment for you. It happens as this explosive action is happening, and I was really impressed by that. The rest of the book has a slightly slower pace to it, and it does fit with that lazy, warm summer, which I think really works. It really goes with the vibe of this cover with all the flowers, the kind of dreaminess to it. I'm still not entirely sure whether this is just a straight up thriller or whether there is a vaguely supernatural element to the honeys going on. There's been a couple of things that I think you could take to be something paranormal, but I'm also not sure whether it could just be that Mars is very traumatized and he's maybe not the most reliable narrator. I'll be interested to see which way it falls. In I want to say the last third, I got my answers about what type of book we were actually in, and the last 50 pages were an absolute wild ride again, definitely back up to that level with chapter 1. There were so many things happening. It really pulled out its horror category rating in those moments. This one would be warnings for body horror for sure. There was some great things happening with it. It all got maybe a little bit convoluted in the end, but I had a really great time. There were a couple of surprises I wasn't expecting, and I think that La Sala really pulled off that idea of a hive mind and some of the implications there. It was just really well done, and it was really enjoyable. It was really, even in the slower middle, I would say that the writing was very, very readable, and I really enjoyed my time with it. I definitely felt like I was eating up the pages without too much effort. I also personally really like this paperback copy because it has a really nice typography effect where the chapter titles at the start of the book are just written in normal text, and as we go through the book, gradually you start to notice the font become fuzzier and wavier until by the end of the book it's hardly legible. Absolutely perfect for the summer, perfect for the mood I've been in. And I'm definitely going to be looking up La Sala's books in future. For one with a verb in the title, I was planning to read Eat the Ones You Love by Sarah Marie Griffin, but I've seen kind of mixed reviews of it. So I might try a couple of chapters, and if it's not working for me, then maybe I'll have to look up something else. But I didn't have a lot of options, or not a lot of things appealed to me that would have fitted the prompt. So we might have to give this a try, and hopefully it's going to work. I did end up going with Eat the Ones You Love. I wasn't sure what I was going to think of it. The reviews, as I said, were a little bit mixed, a little bit on the lower side, and I did have a backup in my pocket if I had to. It didn't fit it was one I didn't own, so I wanted to give this a really fair shot before I yeeted it out and picked up something new. And it worked out fine. It's not going to be a favourite. It is set in a derelict shopping mall, or not derelict, it's a dying shopping mall. So it's run down. A lot of the shops have either closed or are closing. The ones that are left, they have loyal customers, but they're slowly going under, and they're very aware that at any point the centre itself is due for demolition, and I guess they're thinking it's probably going to be flats that we built there. We are set in Dublin, in Ireland. For me personally, the setting was the strongest part of this book. Partly the Irish setting. We really get lots of very Irish phrasing, very Irish slang and words and ways of talking coming through in this, and I really like that. I thought it really kept us very much in the place, in the moment. But also the mall setting was by far my favourite part of the book. I loved the mall, the opportunity it gave for atmosphere and tension and just, I don't want to say vibes, but vibes. Like that inevitability of the downward spiral that this place and these people are in. It had a really good, interesting sense of itself. The story itself is a sapphic retelling of Little Shop of Horrors. My problem with it, and probably, if I'm honest, what I think a lot of people's problems with it, is that with Little Shop of Horrors you have two main things that come together to make that film or that play. It is really, really camp and fun, and it's the horror aspect. And I think maybe what I wanted from this was more of the camp aspect, whereas what we got was a more straightforward horror. In my head, maybe we were gonna have the cute little sapphic romance as they run the flower shop, and then something along the lines of Buffy or Shaun of the Dead as they finally realise what's happening and take on the carnivorous plant while running through this shopping mall, probably wielding, you know, found weaponry, and that kind of campy, actiony Stranger Things vibe is what I was expecting. And instead what you get is a far more experimental horror, where we actually, I don't think, get any of the story from our two main characters. We're following Shell, who has lost her job in marketing. She's had to move home with her mother. She spots a help needed sign in this little florist shop, and she goes to work with Nev, who has just come out of a relationship, is completely, fully invested. Her life is this shop in the shopping centre. She is not willing to leave, and that's because she has a baby growing in the back. But we don't actually ever hear from Shell or Nev. The story does sometimes have their thoughts and feelings in it, but their POV is being told to us by another POV. Baby is telling the story, and quite a lot of the time they, the plant, is telling the story from their point of view, but other times he will give you a third person POV that feels like it feels like you're getting Shelley or Nev's point. It feels like you're getting Shelley's POV, but it's more him telling you what she was thinking or feeling. We're very much doing almost hive mind alien invasion with this book, and it was definitely interesting. It was unusual. I can definitely see that the author is trying something here. I just don't think it worked the way I wanted it to work, and I don't know whether that was because that expectation was wrong or because that kind of experimental quality to the writing just didn't fit for me, but it wasn't everything I dreamed it would be. The book itself is less than 300 pages, and yet it felt like it dragged in places. I was looking for something quite fun, quite upbeat, maybe a little bit ridiculous. It didn't hit the way I wanted it to. I really enjoyed getting to see Shell becoming more part of the little group that Nev has built around her, where it's the two of them, someone that runs the local hairdresser, someone that's in the copy shop, all the little shops that have remained in this mall. There's a little subset of the employees that have their own little kind of after work meetup group, and I really enjoyed getting to see Shell immerse herself in that, getting to see her build new friendships. I really like getting to hear about her revamping her Instagram account, deleting all the photos of her old boyfriend, gradually segueing it into an account that was all about revitalising her life. At first purely for show, putting up photos of the plants so that she was, you know, making a new start, and leaving it kind of mysterious for, you know, if they thought there was a new man on if any of her old friends or old boyfriend thought there was a new man on the scene, then she wasn't bothered. That would be a nice benefit. But then that gradually becoming a genuine change she'd made in her life, to the point where we get to see her actually go into conflict. I just think overall the book felt too long, but also it's less than 300 pages. I don't know where you would have shortened it. I think the pacing just needed something. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I didn't switch it out, but I think it's probably sitting at that 3 mark for me, if I'm honest. The next prompt that I'm going to tackle on the board is the one at the bottom of my row. This is a book that works with another goal, and I think I have a book picked up. For the past 3 years, I have been saying that I want to reread the entire Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. And so far, I read 4 out of 15 in about 3 years. So my ratio is not good, and I really want to push forward on that. So for this square, I am gonna get on that, and I am gonna put in book 5. This is Memnoch the Devil. So me and Memnoch we're getting on okay, I guess. I didn't really remember much about this book at all. I remembered thinking it was one of the more out there concepts, and part of the body thief Memnoch lull in the series between Queen of the Damned and Book 6, The Vampire Armand. So I didn't have very high expectations, and so far, round about I think a quarter or a third of the way in, that's where we are, just at not so high expectations. I will say that this is pretty much entirely a standalone book. You can read it without really knowing anything about the books that have come previously. It has a self-contained plot and it doesn't feature a lot of the characters or history that we know. There are a few passing references, but nothing that would really spoil the series or confuse you as a reader. However, if you do want to read the Vampire Chronicles and you want to go in completely unspoiled, then maybe skip ahead. All you need to know for getting into Memnoch the Devil is that our protagonist is Lestat, a centuries-old vampire. We begin the novel with Lestat killing a man called Roger, and for the first time, feeling real true guilt about it. Lestat is haunted by Roger's ghost. We then basically get interview with the ghost, and we get all of Roger's life history. Roger is not great, and I don't care about his past. Ultimately though, the guilt trip and his being enamoured by this loser sets him up that he is going to look out for Roger's daughter, who is a bit of an evangelist. Where I am, we've just been introduced to the titular character Memnoch, who is the devil. He's come to Lestat with a proposition. He puts forward that he is not the bad guy in this scenario. Yes, he and God are adversaries, but he is not truly evil the way Lestat and the world thinks he is. He says that he needs a right-hand man to help him, and he asks Lestat to be that man. Fresh with all his guilt over Roger, Lestat is not massively comforted by this proposal. Is he truly the worst person in the world? Why would the devil literally have chosen him over everyone else through human history? And from what I remember, we're going to go on a tour of heaven and hell with Memnoch, but honestly, I didn't remember the setup being as long as it is. I didn't remember Roger. I don't care about Roger. And I'm a little disappointed that we haven't had really many cameos from the rest of the cast of the previous books. There are some mentions, obviously Louis from Interview with the Vampire. We have some mentions of the twins from Queen of the Damned, but they are very, very passing references, and as I said, you wouldn't need any history to get those. The only characters we have seen with any real depth are Lestat and David Talbot, God's most boring man, who was kind of the side protagonist in Tale of the Body Thief, and who continually pops up in the series despite the fact there are just far more interesting, far better characters. I don't understand why she hoards those characters away. We get slithers and glimpses of them when they're so much more interesting and we just get more and more of David. We have had a little moment with Armand and I did like that, but I am keen to get to the part that I remember this book being about, which is that Dante's Inferno tour guide moment. I'm hoping that the book is going to pick up a bit. For me personally, this isn't one of the better books in the series. But I do want to keep pushing through it. I do want to keep pushing through the series. I remember there being books I enjoyed a lot more still to come. This is just part of the getting there process. Memnoch the Devil ended up roughly where I thought it would. As a reading experience, it was fine, and it did what the bingo board wanted me to do. It has pushed me forward on a project I was already working on, moved me past a book that, I'll be honest, was a bit of a stumbling block. So in terms of the bingo board, this really couldn't be any more successful because it has completely achieved that goal. And I really wouldn't probably have picked this up for God knows how long if I was having to do it off my own back, because I do know it is one of, in my opinion, the weaker books in the series. Partly that's because we spend that first third learning about Roger, hearing Roger's life story, but then as we move into the next maybe third, maybe more than that, of the book, we are getting Memnoch's story from his point of view. We hear about his disagreement with God, his fall from heaven, the way he helps and learns about the humans that are there. We get to see the crucifixion of Christ through Memnoch's eyes. And that all sounds like it should be really exciting, and for the most part, it's just not. Partly that's because it's hard to tell the characters apart. Memnoch and Lestat are very, very similar characters. They're both, woe is me, to be so attractive and universally beloved and lusted after by everyone we meet. My life is so hard, but I am benevolent and intelligent and give to others. It feels very like we're writing the same character, and that means that there's no real conflict between Lestat and Memnoch at any point. Lestat never butts in to query anything happening in the narrative. We're just told a lot of things in a very detached way. There's no real sense of imminent danger. There's nothing that really grabs you up until the finale. The other problem with it is that it makes the Vampire Chronicles and being part of that almost irrelevant. The narrative does tell us at the front, Lestat tells us that him being a vampire is really not that relevant to the story, and that's true. This could have been a standalone book about any character Anne Rice had wanted. Lestat being Lestat is fairly unimportant to the story. He's really just there to hear other people's stories. And we don't see a lot of characters that we know, and the ones we do see, we only see for brief moments and brief cameos. It doesn't feel like it matters in the world of the Vampire Chronicles. I do know that Anne Rice had a really kind of tempestuous relationship with religion, and she went away from it, went back to it, went away from it multiple times, and when she did, that really impacted what she was writing. I, without looking up, because I don't care that much, would suspect, highly suspect, that this came in one of her return to religion phases, or just at the kind of cusp of that. And that does make sense because this book, from what I remember, at one point was the last book in the Chronicles. It was a 5-book series that ended with Memnoch the Devil. And I think you can see that she is losing interest in the character she's built and the vampires at that point. This is a much more philosophical novel. It is talking a lot about religion and her opinions, her viewpoints on that. Also feels like it's doing a lot of world building for what she thinks of angels and demons and that side of the paranormal world to be. Which, if, again, I remember, I'm sure she wrote, I don't know if it's just a book or a trilogy, but I'm sure she wrote in one of her in religion phases, wrote basically like Jesus, the retelling, and I highly suspect that a lot of the world building in this either goes into or came from that. This feels like someone who is doing the world building for a novel instead of actually writing the novel. So as I said, it was the last book in the series originally, but is it a good ending, or would it have been a good ending? And honestly, I don't think it would have been, even if we didn't know there was more books eventually to come. The finale is really dramatic. There is a lot happens in the last 10% of the book. It is full of action, full of really high stakes, and the book overall does feel like it should be a really compelling end to a series. In the early novels, we had The Interview with the Vampire. It was very much Louis' story. We expanded that slightly as the series went on. We blew up the world of vampires in Queen of the Damned. We had a massive cast there. And then Body Thief, we went back to more kind of Lestat's personal concerns. This one, you're bringing in heaven and hell and angels and demons and God himself. It feels like it should be your, Avengers Endgame, your big massive finale. You're pulling in cosmic forces. And it just doesn't really pay off. That ending is good, but it's not so good that it justifies all the elements of the story. And I do think that is because we don't see much of Lestat in this book. We don't see much of the other vampires. And so there's really no stakes to the book. It's an interesting story about God and the devil, but I don't really care is the problem. It does let me make progress on the series reread though, and I know that the next book is one I did enjoy, so I am now able to look forward to going on and picking up The Vampire Armand. So that is everything I have for you in this video. As you can see, we have now finished off a line of the bingo board. I'm gonna keep chipping away at this horror bingo, but because I don't read a lot of it, I won't be aiming for a blackout. I'm now able to look forward to October when the next bingo board will come out. If you want to talk to me about any of the books in this vlog, do let me know that in the comments. I would love to talk about them some more. Otherwise, let me know how you're getting on with this bingo board if you're doing it, and if not, leave me a blood drop emoji. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.